Her blood brother took her eyes for money, but what happened next will shock you to the core. Betrayal, revenge, and a rise beyond sight. This is the story of Ajaya, a sister whose trust was stolen, but her spirit never was. In the quiet village of Zubaru, tucked between the red hills and dusty roads, twins were born under the whispering wind of the Harmattan. Ajaya and Ogan came into the world moments apart, but they were nothing alike. Ajaya had a calmness about her, eyes that saw beyond what others noticed, and a voice that soothed even the crankiest elder. Ogan, on the other hand, was loud and restless, always chasing the next thrill, always wanting more. While Ajaya spent her time listening to stories and helping old Mama Daku in the fields, Ogan climbed trees, picked fights, and envied anyone with more than he had. Their parents, Dala and Senke, loved them deeply. Dala always said Ajaya had an old soul, and Senke often warned Ogan, "Your hunger will one day eat you if you don't learn to feed it with wisdom." But those warnings were carried away by time. When the twins turned 10, a fierce storm rolled over Zubaru. Rain fell in heavy sheets for days, and on the third night, the mountain behind their home cracked. A landslide crushed everything. Their parents never made it out. The twins barely survived, pulled from the mud by neighbors. After the disaster, Ajaya and Ogan had to grow up fast. They moved into the crowded hut of an old aunt who barely had enough for herself. She cared, but life was hard. Ajaya adapted, finding peace in the little things, helping at the water well, singing lullabies to crying babies, and comforting the sick. But Ogan grew bitter. He watched men with fine clothes ride into town and counted their coins with greedy eyes. He hated the hunger. He hated the dust. And slowly, a dark thought began to grow inside him. Why should I suffer when others live like kings? As they aged, Ajaya's reputation blossomed. People came to her for advice, though she was barely a teen. Her words healed. Her presence calmed. Even travelers passing through Zubaru noticed her and left gifts. Ogan hated it. Why her? He asked himself. Why does everyone praise her while I remain invisible? Ajaya, unaware of her brother's growing bitterness, loved him deeply. She often gave him her share of food and defended him when elders scolded him for being unruly. "He's just trying," she'd say with a soft smile. But Ogan wasn't trying. He was waiting, waiting for a way out, waiting for something, anything, that could give him the life he thought he deserved. One evening, as the sun set behind the Zubaru hills, Ogan sat alone, watching the traders pack their goods. One of them had whispered something strange, a story about a man in Baminza city who bought parts for a price higher than gold. Ogan didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. The seed had been planted. The thought was dark, but to him, it glowed like promise. And as the wind picked up and the night deepened, Ogan looked toward Ajaya, who was singing softly by the fire, and for the first time he saw not his sister, but a way out. One dry afternoon, the sun hung low and unforgiving over Zubaru. Dust curled in the wind as an unfamiliar car rolled into the village square, the kind of car the villagers had only seen in magazines. Out stepped a man dressed in clean white linen, golden rings on his fingers, shoes so shiny they reflected the faces of the curious children who gathered around. His name was Mr. Teku, and he spoke with the calm, clipped accent of a city man, polished, dangerous, and distant. Mr. Teku said he was looking for rare things, untouched things. He claimed he ran a clinic in Baminza city for the wealthy and sick, a place where only the purest gifts of nature could bring healing. The villagers didn't understand what he meant, but they nodded anyway. He gave out sweets, smiled at elders, and left large tips at the local stall. But behind the charm was something colder. Later that evening, Ogan found himself standing near Mr. Teku's car, drawn to its shine, drawn to the man's confidence. Teku noticed. He motioned him over. "You're smart," he said softly. "You want more than this, don't you?" Ogan nodded. Mr. Teku studied him with a calculating smile. "I pay for what others don't see value in. I buy what is still clean, untouched by city lights, untouched by corruption." His voice lowered to a whisper. "I need eyes, but not just any eyes. I need pure eyes. Eyes that have never seen city streets or electric lights. Eyes that have only known the truth of dust and moonlight." Ogan blinked. The words were strange, but the meaning wasn't. This man wanted to buy someone's eyes. At first, Ogan laughed. He thought it was a joke, but Teku handed him a small, heavy envelope. Ogan peeked inside, bundles of crisp cash. More money than he'd seen in his entire life. "Find me eyes like that," Teku said, "and you'll have more." The thought echoed in Ogan's mind for days. He couldn't sleep. That money could change his life. No more hunger. No more sharing a mat with 3 cousins. No more dust in his throat every morning. Just clean beds, full plates, city lights, and power. But whose eyes? There were many in Zubaru, but only one had the kind of eyes Teku described. Ajaya, his twin, his own sister. Her eyes were deep, soft, untouched. She had never left the village, never even seen a bulb flicker. Her eyes saw people's pain, people's truth. She was everything pure. Ogan fought the thought, for a night, maybe 2. But greed is loud, and it doesn't sleep. Soon, he convinced himself she'd be fine. She'd survive. She'd forgive him maybe. After all, she was kind, always forgiving, always sacrificing. He walked up to Mr. Teku the next market day and said, "I have what you want." Teku didn't ask questions. He simply smiled and handed Ogan a second envelope, bigger, heavier. Ogan pocketed the money and looked back at the hut where Ajia was singing. He forced himself to smile. It was done. He had made his choice, and he had chosen money over blood. The air that night was calm, too calm. The sky above Zubaru was full of stars, and the village seemed to sleep peacefully. Ajaya had just finished singing for the elders by the fire when Ogan approached her, his voice unusually soft. "Ajaya," he said, "I have good news. A man from the city wants to help us. He saw your wisdom, your heart. He wants to sponsor us both, to take us to Baminza city. We'll study, work, live better, no more suffering." Ajaya's eyes lit up. She had always dreamed of helping their village, and maybe this was her chance. She hugged Ogan tightly, whispering, "Thank you, brother." They left that night, walking through the narrow paths under the moonlight until they reached the car, waiting at the edge of the forest. Mr. Teku sat behind the wheel, smiling too wide. Ajaya sat in the back, holding her small bag. Ogan sat beside Teku, his hands gripping the envelope under his shirt. As the car sped through the night, Ajaya hummed a quiet song, unaware that she was being driven into darkness. They arrived at a small building, cold and quiet, surrounded by thick trees. Teku called it a clinic. Ogan told her this was where she'd get her first medical checkup before starting her new life. Ajaya trusted him. She followed him into the room with white walls and strange smells. A nurse, silent and stiff, handed her a drink. "Just something to help you rest," Ogan said, avoiding her eyes. She took it, smiled at him once more, then everything went black. Hours passed, maybe a day. When Ajaya opened her eyes, she saw nothing, just blackness. She blinked, rubbed her face, but there was no change. Panic rushed through her. She reached out and touched her face. Bandages. Her heart pounded. She called out, "Ogan, brother," but only silence answered. Footsteps came. A strange voice spoke gently. "You are safe. Rest now." But she knew she wasn't. Her eyes, they were gone. Back in Zubaru, Ogan returned briefly. Not to explain, not to comfort, just to pack a bag. With Mr. Teku's money now in his hand and greed in his chest, he vanished into the night. No one saw him leave. He didn't say goodbye. He couldn't face what he had done. Ajaya, his twin, his blood, was blind because of him. But to him, it didn't matter anymore. He had his freedom. He had the money. And in his twisted mind, that was worth more than her sight. Ajaya lay in that cold room for days, learning to breathe without light. Her heart broke, not just from the pain in her face, but from the wound in her soul. Her brother, the one she loved most, had betrayed her in the deepest way possible. The world she had known was gone. And yet something inside her, quiet but firm, refused to die. Because even in darkness, Ajaya still had vision, just not the kind Ogan could ever buy. The wind was sharp in the Nyori hills, carrying the cries of distant animals and the silence of betrayal. Ajaya lay at the edge of a dusty path, weak and blind, with nothing but the memory of her brother's voice echoing in her ears. She didn't know how long she had been there, only that the sun burned her skin by day and the cold bit her bones by night. She cried out at first, hoping someone would hear, but no one came. Hunger gnawed at her, and her world was now endless black. Then, one morning, she heard slow, steady footsteps, bare, dragging through the dirt. She tried to call out, but her voice cracked. The footsteps stopped beside her, and strong arms lifted her gently. She couldn't see his face, but she felt warmth in his touch. The man never spoke, but she heard his breathing, calm, patient. He carried her for what felt like hours until they reached a quiet place built from stones and old wood. It smelled of clay, earth, and ash. The man was Bakutu, a mute sculptor who lived alone in the hills. He never said a word, but Ajaya learned his language through movement, how he placed her food beside her hand, how he guided her fingers to a basin of water, how he gently helped her sit when she stumbled. At first she was lost. Every step was a guess, every reach a risk, but Bakutu never left her side. Days turned to weeks. Ajaya learned to move by counting steps, by feeling the air, by listening. She memorized the shape of the house, the texture of the walls, the creak in the floor near the fire. Slowly she began to rebuild herself. One day, Bakutu placed a lump of clay in her. She didn't understand. He guided her fingers over it, then pressed her hand to his own sculpture, a figure with soft curves and strong arms. She touched it carefully. She felt the emotion carved into it. Then she began to mold the clay in her hands. At first, her sculptures were simple, rough, unsure, but she kept going. Each day, she shaped clay by memory, by heart, by sound and feeling. She didn't need to see. She knew. Her fingers danced with emotion, forming faces she remembered, voices she loved, dreams she had buried. What she created was more than art. It was soul. Her first masterpiece was a sculpture of two children, hand in hand, standing on a hill, one looking ahead, the other turning back. She ran her fingers over their faces and wept. It was her and Ogan. Before the betrayal, before the pain, Bakutu watched, his eyes full of silent pride. Though he could not speak, he understood. She was no longer just surviving, she was living. In the silence of the hills, Ajaya's gift was born. She had lost her eyes, but found a vision far deeper, one that could not be stolen, one that no money could ever buy. The hills of Nyori, once quiet and forgotten, slowly began to hum with whispers of a mysterious blind sculptor. It started with a traveler who spotted a statue outside a small stone hut. It was a sculpture of a woman with broken wings, sitting but still reaching toward the sky. He touched it, and something stirred in him, something he couldn't explain. He asked who made it, and Bakutu pointed silently to Ajaya, who was seated in a corner, her fingers gently shaping another piece of clay. The man was stunned. But she's blind. Bakutu only nodded. The traveler bought the statue and took it back to the city. From there, the whispers grew louder. Soon, more visitors made their way up the narrow paths of Nyori Hills, all wanting to see the one they now called the Soul Carver. They came expecting to find pity. Instead, they found power. Ajaya never spoke much. She didn't need to. Her work spoke for her. Each sculpture held a truth that pierced deep into the heart. Grief, loss, hope, pain, healing. One sculpture showed a young girl kneeling in darkness, her eyes missing, but a light bursting from her chest. Another showed a man holding coins in one hand and a heart in the other, his face twisted in shame. Those who looked at her work found pieces of their own stories in the curves of the clay. Many cried. Some walked away silent, changed. Collectors offered large amounts of money. One rich woman from Baminza even asked her to move to the city. Ajaya smiled and shook her head. "The hills gave me my hands back," she whispered. "I will stay." She didn't crave city lights. She had learned to see in a way others never could. Her fame grew, but she remained the same. Every piece she created came from emotion, not sight. She sculpted betrayal not with anger, but with truth. She sculpted pain not with bitterness, but with grace. And people felt it. Some begged to know her story. She never told them everything, but she always touched her chest and said, "I carve what I feel, not what I see." Even the city newspapers wrote about her. Blind woman of Nyori turns pain into art. People across the land called her the Soul Carver, a name that carried weight and wonder. But she stayed humble. Every evening, she would sit outside with Bakutu, feeling the wind on her skin, listening to the hills breathe. She often smiled to herself, knowing that while she had lost her sight, she had found something greater, a voice that touched hearts, a gift that could not be stolen. Her hands, once trembling in darkness, now shaped stories the world needed to hear. And though she could no longer see the faces of those who admired her, she could feel their emotions through the silence. Ajaya had risen, not as a victim, but as a legend. Ogan sat in a golden chair in his new city home, surrounded by everything he had once dreamed of: fine clothes, expensive wine, loud parties, and endless praise. But none of it mattered. Each night, when the world grew quiet, the darkness began to speak. At first, it was whispers, soft and haunting. Then came the visions. In the mirror above his bed, he saw her, Ajaya, her face pale, her eyes gone, her lips trembling as if asking, "Why?" He would scream and smash the glass, but every time he looked again, she was there. He tried to ignore it, tried to drown the visions with music, women, and drink, but they followed him. On the street, he'd hear her soft voice call his name from a passing crowd. At dinners, he'd feel her breath on his neck. At night, he'd wake up in sweat, hands clawing at his own face, begging for silence. The eyes he had sold, her eyes, seemed to curse his soul. He couldn't look at any reflection without seeing her pain. No matter how bright the city lights, his world had turned into shadows. The buyer who took her eyes had disappeared. Ogan tried to find him, to return the money, to undo the past, but the man had vanished like smoke. Ogan's wealth grew, but peace ran from him. He went to doctors, to priests, even to shamans. One old seer told him, "You stole sight, but now your spirit sees what your eyes never could. You can't outrun blood." Sleep became a stranger. Each time he closed his eyes, he'd fall into the same dream. Ajaya, standing in the hills of Nyori, her hands full of clay, her blind eyes glowing with light, whispering, "You took my eyes, but I see more than you ever will." Ogan would wake screaming, his chest tight, his hands shaking. He stopped sleeping altogether. He grew pale, thin, and nervous. He stopped attending parties. People whispered that the rich young man from the village had gone mad. They were right. He stopped looking at mirrors. He covered them all, afraid of her face. His mansion, once full of laughter, now echoed with his own cries. He couldn't feel joy. Food turned to ash in his mouth. Music sounded like weeping. Once, he tried to donate all the money, hoping it would lift the curse. But even that didn't work. Ajia's presence clung to him like smoke. He remembered her last smile before the betrayal, the trust in her voice when she called him brother. And now that word haunted him. Brother. It rang in his ears day and night. In the end, Ogan, who had once walked proudly in the city, began to crawl through it like a ghost. He wore dark glasses, not to hide his eyes, but to escape hers. But it was useless. Her image was inside him now, buried deep in his soul, and the cruel truth, the eyes he stole, had opened his own, but far too late. The city of Baminza buzzed with excitement as the annual National Art Festival began. Artists from every corner of the land came to display their finest work, but there was one name on everyone's lips, the sole carver of Nyori. No one had ever seen her face, but her sculptures had touched hearts all over the country. Her art didn't just show beauty, it told stories, raw and deep, with a truth that cut through silence. On the final day of the festival, the crowd gathered around the grand stage. Whispers ran wild as a quiet figure was led forward. Ajia, dressed in a simple white robe, her eyes covered with a delicate scarf. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Beside her stood her final piece, a tall, haunting sculpture titled The Brother's Knife. The room went still. The sculpture showed a faceless man, his head bowed, one hand clutching a knife, the other holding a single bleeding eye. The detail was so real, so painful, it made some gasp, others cry. The faceless man looked hollow, cursed. A silent scream seemed frozen in his posture, and the eye, though sculpted in clay, seemed to weep. Viewers stared in silence, moved in a way they couldn't explain. It wasn't just a sculpture, it was a confession, a warning, a mirror. In the crowd, wearing dark glasses and trying to hide in the back, was Ogan. His heart froze. He knew that sculpture, that story, that truth. He didn't need to hear a word. He felt it in his bones. That was him. The knife, the eye, the shame. It was his story carved in stone for the whole world to see. Sweat poured down his face. He couldn't breathe. He wanted to run, but his legs felt nailed to the ground. The whispers around him grew louder, not because they knew it was him, but because the story hit something deep in every person's heart. Betrayal, pain, regret. Ogan couldn't stop staring. Ajaya, blind and calm, stood beside the sculpture with a quiet strength. Her face showed no anger, no bitterness, only truth, and that truth burned hotter than fire. He tried to look away, but the sculpture held him. The eye seemed to stare straight into his soul, asking, was it worth it? In that moment, Ogan felt smaller than he ever had. The crowd clapped. Some stood in ovation. Others silently wiped tears. Ajaya bowed her head, then slowly walked off the stage with the help of Bakutu, who had come with her. Ogan stayed frozen, hidden in the crowd, unable to move. She hadn't said his name. She hadn't pointed at him, But she didn't need to. Her art had done the speaking. And it spoke louder than any scream ever could. The city would praise her. The world would remember her. And Ogan, though surrounded by people, felt utterly alone. Because now, everyone had seen what he tried so hard to hide. And the worst part? So had he. The room was still echoing with applause when the host stepped forward and gently asked Ajaya if she would like to speak. The crowd fell silent. Everyone leaned in, not wanting to miss a word from the woman whose hands had carved pain into truth. Bakutu, her silent guardian, guided her to the microphone. She stood there quietly for a moment, her face calm, her eyes covered with a pale cloth. Then she spoke, soft, steady, and powerful. I once trusted someone more than anything, Ajaya began, her voice reaching every corner of the hall. We were born on the same day, in the same hour. We were twins. We shared food, laughter, and dreams. But one day, the person I trusted most took something from me that can never be returned. She paused. The silence deepened. He said we were going to the city for a better life, she continued. I believed him. I followed. But I woke up in darkness. My eyes were gone. My brother was gone. And I was alone. Gasps rose from the crowd. Cameras clicked. Phones recorded. Her story swept through the room like a storm. No names, no revenge, just raw truth. I learned to live in that darkness, Ajaya said, voice steady. I met someone who didn't speak, but who saw me. I learned to carve what I could no longer see, and in doing so, I saw deeper than I ever had, with eyes. In the crowd, Ogan couldn't breathe. His legs shook. Sweat soaked his collar. His chest tightened like a vice. He had stayed hidden during the show, thinking maybe, just maybe, he would escape unseen. But her voice, her words, pulled him out of every shadow. The weight of her truth crushed every wall he had built to protect his guilt. Ajaya ended with, I tell this story not for pity, not for anger. I tell it so no other soul will walk into the trap I did. Pain does not have to end us. It can shape us. A thunderous applause rose. And then, Ogan screamed. He collapsed in the middle of the hall, drawing all eyes. Cameras spun toward him. Phones turned. The crowd gasped as he fell to his knees, sobbing like a child. It was me, he cried. I did it. I sold her eyes for money. I was the brother. I took her to the clinic. I betrayed her. Silence again. Shock, then outrage. The press swarmed. Security rushed forward. Some people wept. Others shouted. But Ajaya stood still, expression unreadable, her blind eyes behind the cloth facing the chaos she had not caused, but had always known would come. Ogan's words echoed in the air, raw and breaking. I see her every night. I hear her voice. I thought I bought a better life, but I only bought a curse. And there, in front of the city, in front of the world, the truth tore through the walls of guilt and greed, and no one would forget it. The news of Ogan's confession spread like wildfire across the land. Within days, the elders of Zubaru, their home village, summoned both Ajaya and Ogan back. The village that once raised them with love and watched them play as children now sat in silence, waiting to deliver judgment. The great square was packed. Everyone, from the youngest children to the oldest elders, stood in heavy silence as Ajaya arrived, guided by Bakutu, and Ogan walked in alone, head bowed in shame. The chief elder, Nduka, stepped forward. His voice was strong, but laced with sorrow. Zubaru raised both of you. When your parents died, this village wept for you, and today, we weep again, for different reasons. Ogan stood trembling. He couldn't look at anyone. His clothes were stained, his face hollow. The man who once dreamed of riches now looked like a shadow of the boy he once was. You betrayed not just your sister, Elder Nduka continued, but the soul of this village. Greed turned you against blood. Your hands sold what no man has the right to take. The villagers murmured, anger and grief mixing in their hearts. Ogan dropped to his knees and whispered, I have no excuse. I accept whatever judgment the elders give. Ajaya, standing calmly beside Bakutu, didn't speak. She kept her face forward, not turning toward her brother. After long consultation, the elders delivered their judgment. Ogan, the chief elder said, you are stripped of all titles, land, and inheritance. From this day till your last breath you will serve this village with your hands. You will build, clean, and carry. You will earn your food through labor and humility. The villagers nodded in agreement. Some cried, some looked away. Then, unexpectedly, Ajaya stepped forward. I have something to say, she said softly. The crowd stilled. Even the wind seemed to pause. "I forgive you, Ogan," she said. "Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry the poison of hate. You took my sight, but you didn't take my soul." A silence washed over the square. A few gasped. Even Ogan wept openly. "But," Ajaya added, "forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the past. I release you from my heart, but I will never see you again, in flesh or memory." That chapter is closed. Then she turned and walked away. Ogan remained kneeling in the dust, his tears falling silently. The villagers began to move, leaving him there, a broken man beneath the weight of his own choices. And just like that, judgment was done, not just by law, but by love, pain, and truth. Ajaya returned to Nyori Hills, her heart heavy, but her purpose clear. She had left the village of Zubaru behind, but her journey was far from over. With the money earned from her art and the support of those who believed in her, she opened a school dedicated to blind artists, an institution where sightless hands could shape the world in ways the eye could never fully comprehend. In the heart of Nyori, surrounded by the rolling hills that had once been her prison, she created a place where others like her could find not just a livelihood, but a voice. The school quickly gained recognition. Artists who had lost their sight through accidents, illness, or age came from all over the region to learn from Ajaya and her team of teachers, who were themselves blind but gifted in the arts. Ajaya's teachings went beyond technique. She taught them to feel their art, to pour their souls into every piece. She showed them that the greatest masterpieces were not just seen, but felt deep within. As the years passed, Ajaya's sculptures began to gain attention far beyond Nyori Hills. They were displayed in national museums, each piece telling a story of pain, hope, and perseverance. Her most famous work, The Brother's Knife, was hailed as a masterpiece of emotional depth, a faceless man holding a bleeding eye. The piece symbolized the betrayal she had endured, but also the strength she had found in the darkness. Her reputation spread, and soon collectors, critics, and artists from across the nation were eager to see her work. But despite her fame, Ajaya remained humble, always focused on her students and her mission. She never sought revenge, never tried to make a spectacle of her brother's wrongdoings. Her art did that for her, speaking louder than any words ever could. Ogan, meanwhile, had become a shell of the man he once was. The servitude he had been sentenced to was endless. His hands, which had once dreamed of wealth and power, were now used for labor, shoveling, carrying, and building for the people he had betrayed. But no matter how hard he worked, he could never escape the weight of his guilt. At night, he would dream of his sister's face, her voice, and the sculptures she had carved in her pain. He knew that he would never understand what she had become, and that truth tortured him. Ajaya, however, had moved on. She had found a new purpose, a new life, and the peace she had once thought was lost forever. Her school became a beacon of hope for the blind, a place where art and life could be reimagined. And when her final piece was placed in the National Museum, it was clear to all who saw it that Ajaya had achieved what no one thought possible. She had turned the darkness into light, the pain into art, and the betrayal into justice. And so, her story ended not with hatred, but with triumph. Though her brother took her eyes, the plaque beneath her final piece read, "Ajaya saw what he never could, truth, art, and justice." Thank you for staying with us through Ajaya's incredible journey, her strength, her pain, and her ultimate triumph. From betrayal to rebirth, she proved that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can rise and create beauty beyond what the eye can see. Her story is a testament to the power of forgiveness, the strength of resilience, and the undeniable truth that justice always finds a way. If Ajaya's journey touched your heart, if you too believe that no one should ever be defined by their hardships, then please take a moment to show your support. Hit the like button to let us know you connected with her story. Share this video with those who need to hear about the power of inner strength and the importance of justice. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming and powerful stories that remind us of what's truly important in life. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring more of these stories to life. Together, we can inspire and uplift each other through the power of storytelling. Thank you for being part of our community. We're so grateful for you, and we look forward to sharing more unforgettable journeys with you. Don't forget, your heart has the power to see beyond sight, just like Ajaya. Keep believing, keep creating, and never stop fighting for justice. See you in the next video.